I am delighted to have this opportunity to bring somebody who I think will talk about something that should be pertinent to a lot of us who are either business owners or who have our own part to play in retaining workforces, in optimizing the way we have our teams work for us. So this is going to be a great little episode. It is a Friday, so I'm hoping that most of you are slowing down. But for many of us, of course, there is no slowdown, where as business owners, many people will be working into the weekend and doing their bit to support their team, support the remote staff that they have. And one of the things I've been getting a lot this week is about how out of the way leaders are going for their teams right now. And it's really admirable, but there is one big concern that's coming up time and time again. And a couple of my coaching clients actually who have raised this in the leadership space, who are basically giving away their oxygen to somebody else. They're not putting their own oxygen mask on first, to use that analogy. And they're suffering and drowning in their attempts, their noble attempts to try and look after their workforces. And unfortunately, this of course leads to all kinds of physiological, mental, emotional stress and other impairment issues. So hopefully some of the insights that we'll get in this episode will give us some tips. And I'm delighted to have with us our special guest joining us here. And let me just quickly introduce myself. I am Prash Catchick. I'm your host. I'm the founder of Stress to Success and Urban Spirituality. And I'm here because I feel that we need to come together to give this small bite-sized wisdom to everybody out there. And collectively, I know there's so many good people doing good live interviews and podcasts. So collectively, we can really raise the narrative of what needs to be addressed right now, putting aside those big concerns for our businesses and organizations in the future, and really focusing on what we have ahead of us so we can start to make sure we come out of this in a positive way with some good momentum. So on that note, allow me to introduce our guest. Our guest is Steve Catchick. There are many hats that Steve has worn. One of those hats is as a virtual and remote speaker, a presentation coach. One of his great claims to fame, he is one of the leaders of the PSA. It is the most renowned speaking body internationally, arguably, the Professional Speakers Association. He's also a virtual and live trainer, an MC, a customer retention specialist, amongst many other things. Please show your welcome for Steve. Steve, welcome to the interview.
Thank you very much, Prash, and thank you for welcoming me here. That sounds like quite a collection of things. Though I'm all things.
It is a lot of strings to your, veritable career that you've had.
Well, I've had a varied career. You know, I joined the forces at 16, and I was effectively an engineer, an electronic engineer in the forces. So right. I spent a lot of my time since I came out in the customer-facing roles as a customer service engineer, account manager, site manager. So I've been in various, but it's always been customer facing. And effectively, I just specialize on two prime topics. Communications, and that's why I'm known as the high impact communicator. But I specialize in how you make an impact when you communicate one-to-one, right. One-to-many. And the other area is through what I call a program I call the Secret Salesforce. And that's about what's the impact that your people have to help develop that customer experience and develop retention. That's my real areas of specialities. Yes, I have been regional president at one of the Professional Speaking Association regions. So I won't say I'm a senior leader there. I've been a regional leader on one of the regions. And in Toastmasters International, I've been division governor for the south of England, and I'm what's known as distinguished Toastmaster. But yes, here today I think to talk about how we can keep our customers in these COVID-19 times.
It's a big challenge, I think, for everyone to try to engage their customers, and I want us to go into that. But if I may, by segue, tell us a little bit about your background. What's led you into this arena where you are at the moment?
Yeah, I think life happens. To say, I didn't start off with this in mind. I joined the army at the tender age of 16, and I wanted to travel the world. I didn't. I saw a lot of Germany, loved Germany, but
Right.
an engineering background, and it stayed that way for many years. Personal circumstances affected me in 1990, and it was really a decade later that I took stock and thought, what am I doing? You know, things were not happening, not going right, and I looked for change. And I started my personal development journey. So I started it with what's known as the Landmark Education System, the Landmark Forum, and did 3 programs with them.
I remember it well, over in Evershot Street in London.
Yeah. I ran a program on what's known as Self-Expression and Leadership Program. I took an event out for Cancer Research UK. I called it Who Cares Wins. And we raised £2,500 in one weekend. But
incredible.
It was a good starting ground. And from that, I went on to start coaching, and also my NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming journey.
Right.
I did my NLP trainers training in 2006. And that's when I think I realized also, having been taking a gap year the year before, I took a gap year.
Right.
Now, I always say my catchphrase is gap years are far too good for kids.
Right.
And
yeah, well, there's a truth right there for all of us.
Toastmasters by then, and having done the NLP trainers training, I realized that standing up, speaking and training was really where I like being. Less so in the one-to-ones, more about the one-to-many. I enjoy that. And that started me off on the area. Communications, I just love focusing on communications. I think everyone has the God-given right to stand up and speak eloquently to anyone they want. And yet, most people are very nervous about speaking in public. Having also spent all those years in customer-facing roles, 2 things I know to be true. Service is remembered long after price is forgotten. And we always remember the experience that we felt, providing it was a memorable one of negative or positive emotion. But always remember that. And I guess that's what's led me on to programs on communication, speaking in front of others, and on what I call the Secret Salesforce, which is developing people.
So let's talk about that, Steve, because you know, you hit a very poignant thing for, I think, most people. The sales force, or let's say the people force, is really what is at the heart and soul of every enterprise, you know, no matter how small or big. And I know we talked about that before. It doesn't matter about the size of the organization. It's the people who are, you know, it's heart and soul. Now, how those people make their customers feel and how leaders make their staff feel are 2 key triggers for success, both in the delivery of the service and the products, in terms of revenue, and of course, as we're going to talk about here, in terms of retention. So let me ask you this, Steve, why is it so important at the moment in this current climate for this particular theme to be understood, for this message to be gotten across about retaining workforces, not just sales forces, but workforces?
Yeah. Before I answer that bit, can I just make a slight correction? This isn't about Salesforce. It's what I call the Secret Salesforce. And the Secret Salesforce are the hidden resources.
Right.
In an organization, a large organization, that's the people. And it's not the salespeople that they have their training, they have their things. It's people in customer service, reception, finance, admin, accounts management. They all have a part to play. So in an organization, the Secret Salesforce are internal. And yet when you come to small businesses, very small businesses, or speakers, coaches, consultants, trainers, the Secret Salesforce is almost entirely external. They are your network, and how you develop your network to be your ambassadors. Because I refer to 3 types of people in an organization: ambassadors, and then at the other end of the scale, saboteurs, and the vast majority in the middle, the neutrals. And every organization, even charities, I'm told, have saboteurs. So going back to the question, and I'm trying to just clarify which part it was. Why is it so important now? Is that right?
Yeah. And then we'll go into the definitions, because obviously you've just opened up some good subjects there, ambassadors, neutrals and saboteurs. Before we go there, yeah. Why is it more important now than perhaps even before?
Well, a friend of mine, he used to be vice president of a subsidiary of Hewlett Packard, and he refers to, as many people, we all know, but it takes more effort and money to find new customers than sell to existing ones. He put it another way. He told me that typically in the subsidiary he worked for, typically 8%, maybe 10 maximum of the revenue was net new business, but some 40%. Probably around, maybe 35 to 40% was new business to existing customers. And over 40% was existing business to existing customers. He put that in, forget percentages. Now you put that in dollars, actual cash. Let's take $100 million business. And obviously a large organization be considerably more. A small business might be considerably less, but it's putting it into a figure. If you're saying that 90% of the revenue could be something like $90 million, at risk by not maintaining that customer experience is a good half of that. You could lose by a bad relationship or bad $40 million in one hit. And I can tell you that when I worked at IBM at one time, one of their top 6 customers dropped them. So on midnight on a Sunday, they switched to another company. That one drop was a massive hole in the revenue stream of the company. So it's critical at any time. But right now, let's face it, business is tough right now. So why would we be scrabbling around looking for new business? Why not try to maintain the relationships to keep the existing business?
Totally makes sense. And that the emphasis wants to be on that. So if we are, so let's talk about the existing business. You're a part of an enterprise or you're a leader, you've tuned in here. Whether you're a leader, whether you're a key decision maker, or whether you're a team leader within that organization, you just alluded to 3 different categories of resources, human resources within the organization. Would you care to give some definitions there?
Yes, I will. Let's take the ambassadors, because this is the Secret Salesforce is all about developing ambassadors. I'll give an example of one. I'll give an example of a couple really, but one I met, Travelodge in Brighton. Now you may not associate Travelodge with the most perfect sort of hotel, not 5-star, but I arrived there one day about 18 months ago, having been working in Brighton, and John, who was on the reception there, welcomed me immediately with a broad smile. He welcomed me by my name, so he'd taken the trouble to see who was coming in that day. He welcomed me back. I'd never been to Travelodge Brighton, but I had been to many other travel lodges. So he took the trouble to look up. He was over and above, he was enthusiastic, reassured me about the car park, advised me in the best pubs and the best restaurants, depending where I wanted to go. He was just enjoying his job. He was an advocate. I relate to ambassadors of people who drive the business forward. They are focused on the business. They believe in the values and the direction of the business, and they give what I call the baker's dozen. And for some of our listeners who may be too young to know what that is, going back many years ago, when you went to a baker, you might ask for a dozen loaves of a dozen bread rolls. A good baker would throw another one in for good measure. And that's what John was like. And that's an ambassador, someone who's always there, always giving, enthusiastic, and believes in the business and the business values. Now, the saboteur is quite the opposite. They are only interested in themselves. They don't like what they're doing. They don't enjoy it. They will manipulate. They will put you down behind your back. Yeah, very much. They could be passive aggressive styles. They need to draw the energy out of the room. You know, it's like when someone walks in a room and you just feel that energy sucking out.
Yeah, it's Yeah.
I always say, if
Very
you don't
much.
know who it is, it's probably you. But yeah, that's the two extremes. But in the middle, you've probably got 90% or more of the people, the neutrals. And again, at one end, you've got the neutrals who are just jobs worth. They'll do the job, not enthusiastic, but get on with it. Nine till 5, close it. When you've got the top end, when they're mostly engaged, they're solid performers. They do what's things, but they don't necessarily volunteer over and above. They'll give a solid performance. The ambassadors are those who go more than that, and they're really towards more. If I just say, I sometimes refer it to what's called Net Promoter Score in customer experience, where you're asked one question on a scale of 0 to 10. How likely are you to refer us to other customers?
Right.
And 0 to 6 are detractors and give a negative score. 7 and 8 are neutrals and don't count. 9 and 10 are ambassadors. And I adapt this to say that 1 and 2s are, I ignore the zeros. I say 1 and 2s are typical saboteurs.
Right.
3 to 5s are partly engaged and they're just jobs worth. 6 to 8 are engaged, but not over and above. So
they'll do a solid performance, as you said, yeah.
If asked directly, they might refer you, but they won't go out of their way.
Out of their way, yeah.
The 9 and 10s are the ambassadors that will go out of their way to assist. Put that into a small business or a one-man band, and it's your network of contacts. They're the people that could refer you. They could become your advocates. They could be there for you at all times, 24/7.
Which leads me, thank you for that description, which leads me to the question I would imagine is on everyone's lips right now, which is, how can we build more of the ambassadors?
Okay.
And how can we, I suppose by extension, how can we whittle out or diminish or minimize the number of detractors that we have? We may not be able to solve that entire spectrum, but what could we do to really put it where it really counts?
I use 5 principles, and it will vary for whether it's an organization or a small business, because the principles, whether they apply internally or externally.
Or externally, yeah.
And I start by you start with relationships. Right. It's about building relationships and maintaining relationships, both internally and externally, even for an organization. You need to build relationships, you need to update them, make it easy for people to want to work with you.
Right.
The other thing is, certainly for internal, you must empower your people. No one really likes being dictated, just told, just do that, do that, do that, and have no flexibility or freedom. You need to trust your people to do it.
Right.
So I'll give an example of that, of the trust, the empowerment. Some years ago, my youngest son was a budding thespian, and that means waiter, because all budding thespians are waiters. Well, coming home for Christmas, but
I wonder how many of our viewers realize how scarily true that statement is, Steve.
Yeah.
As I was a budding thespian at one stage myself, and I was a waiter.
Yeah.
Back in my college days.
He's worked at various places as a waiter. He's now got a sales job, but well, he wanted a particular dressing gown for Christmas, an expensive one for John Lewis, which I bought him, but it was a size too small. And he came back on the night of the 24th, Christmas Eve, and had to go back to work at lunchtime on the 27th. So I had to get up really early on the 27th, drive to John Lewis in Reading, walk in on a door on the first day of the sales, and it was packed, absolutely jam-packed.
Understandably.
And as I walked in, and the sign said no refunds or exchanges until the new year. But I saw an assistant on her own, and I went up and explained the situation. She stopped, smiled, and told me to wait, and went upstairs and brought the right size dressing gown done. I looked at the queues at the tills, thinking I'll never get to that. They'll probably say no. She smiled, took me to an unused till, dealt with a transaction, and wished me a happy new year.
Wow.
Now, was she in sales? Was she in service? Or was she in leadership? See, she stepped up and took the decision to contradict management guidelines because it was the right thing to do for the customer. And that is what an ambassador is. They have to be empowered, though, and trusted. Because if you don't trust them, why have you employed them?
Right. Very fair.
I also talk about communication. You have to communicate clearly, with clarity,
right,
and avoid assumptions and miscommunications. Because I would bet that, including myself, everyone probably listening in has at some time miscommunicated or not been clear at their communication, and think of the consequences.
Yes.
I also talk about, then the next step is the culture of the organization of your business. Are you walking the walk or talking the talk? Because the culture is about walking and believing and living the values. So, and it's your brand. The culture, if you walk it, is your brand. Are you clear on that brand? And do your people know and understand the brand? But the final principle I tend to use, and the one I think brings it all together, because it brings that all in, is engagement. Because if you're not engaging your people or your network, where are they on that scale of 1 to 10? And they're most likely on the scale of, when you get the saboteurs on the scale of 1 or 2, you get the ambassadors at the 9 or 10, and you get those in the middle. And your aim is to move people along, saboteurs to be partly engaged, or get rid of the saboteurs away from your network, away from your business, and slowly move the others up to become ambassadors. But it's a two-way thing. You have to trust and believe in them too, and give them the means. So that's how I would help to develop the ambassadors to be a Secret Salesforce.
Thank you. I mean, the structure that you just described, I want to just circle back, if I may, for a moment. You talked about, there's two things that you raised here, and I want to query on, and I think we've got a question or two coming in as well, so I'll make sure that we just cover those as well before we wrap up. Firstly, you talk about culture. Culture is obviously driven by, an organization's values and their mission ultimately. Now, culture doesn't change overnight. We all know that. For many people, culture, for many organizations, the bigger it is, the longer it takes. For an organization that has a culture that is already concrete, it's already in place, I have two questions around this. What might you say to somebody in such an organization where the culture is actually quite conducive, but it's not had its impact on the people that you want to make ambassadors?
I think then, to me, that means that the leaders of that organization are not demonstrating the culture, which is why I said it's about walking the walk, not talking the talk. So how consistent is it? How clear is it? See, a long time ago, I believe that a lot of performance reviews could be done almost entirely by living the values. Because if you're demonstrating the values, whatever else is happening, you're doing the right job.
You're doing the right job anyway.
But how clear are they being put down, all the way down through all the layers? And
okay.
Trader, how are you demonstrating it to your network?
To your network. Okay. So that was one side of the question. The other side is where a culture may not be conducive. Now, it's not going to change overnight. And where you have a disjoint between a culture that's not very conducive, and yet you have potential staff in your organization who could rise to become ambassadors.
Yeah.
And but there's that disjoint there.
There is. Again, when it's not conducive, then there's something wrong. I mean, for instance, values shouldn't change. I still recall seeing an interview with Steve Jobs when he was asked if the core values, would he drop the core values of Apple to meet certain standards? And he took his time answering, but he made it very clear he would rather shut Apple down than drop its core values, because it's what he stood for. Now, if the values have been just pulled out, then you don't really ever have any values, and it's just nice to have. People pull out words, and some organisations do just pull out words, perhaps. Then maybe it's time when they look together. What really do we stand for? And that's the time it should change.
Right.
Then that you shouldn't change otherwise. So if it's not being conducive to the right thing, it's, are they living it, and what can they do to correct it? Zappos, a company in the States, now part of Amazon, their values
Zappos,
yeah, they were created by their people, and they actually have a system where, after the 3-month probation, their people are brought in and they're offered, I think it's now $5,000 to leave there and then, or stay and not get a penny or a dollar.
Interesting.
They want the right attitude, the right people who match the values. But that
what
means
an interesting
the leaders have to demonstrate it.
Very interesting concept. Which leads me to another question here. You mentioned towards the end that for those detractors that exist in organizations, and you talked about, finding ways to get rid of them. And I guess, if I was wearing my HR hat, I guess what you're saying, reading between the lines, is finding ways where we can distance their impact on harming what the organization is trying to achieve, its revenue lines, its front-facing, customer-facing, stakeholder-facing work. Is that, could you kind of speak to that for a bit to clarify?
I think there's two ways to deal with the saboteurs. And one is to educate them and work with them and engage and motivate them so they're being taken up. And they may not go from saboteurs to ambassadors, but if you take them up at least to partly engaged,
then they're going to be neutral.
Yeah, because saboteurs can be a poison in an atmosphere. They can actually really affect the morale of everybody else. So the first thing is a damage control, limit damage.
Limit damage, yeah.
If that doesn't work, then you have to look at the processes for, are they in the right organization, and what are the right processes for getting rid of them?
Right. Yeah. Could there be another way for them within the organization? Can they be relocated?
Absolutely. They might be relocated, or it may be ultimately they have to leave. But that's decisions you have to see what you can do to limit that damage and move them somewhere else, because they may be saboteurs in what they're doing, but move them to something they're really happy to do, and they change.
Absolutely.
That's where engagement comes in, employee engagement, and use employee engagement surveys, proper ones, automatic, external to the company. I tend to be an ambassador for one, and I advocate always use a regular employee engagement surveys.
So that could be a good vehicle in order to ascertain what that map of detractors, neutrals, ambassadors could look like, what that through those surveys, and to see how you can then rejuxtapose your workforces according to what's coming back, and redistribute their efforts, redistribute their roles, etc.
With one caveat, the surveys will be automatic, anonymous, sorry. So you won't know who, but if you're looking at what's the undertone in the department, then you should be able to take steps to correct it. And it could be uncomfortable hearing as a manager. You might not like what you hear, but if it brings you the results, you will look good because you'll get the performance.
Yeah. And I mean, and we often talk about this, certainly when I'm working with organizations, we talk about ego deflation, which is a term we use in emotional intelligence. And the whole idea of part of the idea of ego deflation within emotional intelligence is to be able to help leaders to be able to not get into a situation where they're being blindsided by some of their prejudices, by some of their firm held beliefs, which are now being provoked or prodded by uncomfortable feedback that's coming back, and the ego's kind of stepping in. So I think that it speaks volumes to what you're saying, that, I think it's almost that managers and decision makers almost need to be prepared to receive that disappointing feedback, because the more forearmed they are that this could be coming, the better poised they are to not be thrown off kilter and actually start to make those changes within the organization, or, as you said earlier, to delegate people to help them make that or raise other people up. I mean, this is classically done in retail, right? You know, there are people who perhaps when they're not performing, they are not best served to be told by their senior managers. Instead, the senior manager may delegate a team leader and say, look, we need you to work this position, or let's swap this person from your team to this team over here. It becomes something that you empower somebody to do and then work with that individual.
And I still think empowerment is a big thing. Most people, when they're given responsibility and allowed to do things their way without micromanagement, they tend to step up. It may not be everybody, but I think most will step up more when they're not micromanaged, and you demonstrate trust.
Right. When you demonstrate trust, especially, which actually is a great time for me to ask this question that's come in. We've got a couple of questions that come in as we move towards the last part of our session here. Vimal Singh asks, how do we complain to business leaders that they are not doing a good job? And how should, and how do we complain to business leaders that they are perhaps not doing a good job and that they should leave or change?
Yes, that's always harder if it's your managers or a business leader, to how you say that. This is where I really believe in engagement surveys. You can't easily go up to your manager and say, you know, I don't think you're doing a good job. It won't really help anyway. And if you go above them to their manager, it could backfire. There's no easy option to that. All you can do is say things as they come up.
As they come up,
as they come up, deal with something and say, well, actually, I don't feel that's quite the right way to do it. But, you know, if that's what you insist, okay, I have to do it. But I really don't believe that. Let's stand up, step up. But the best way is to perhaps keep requesting external automatic surveys, engagement surveys.
Okay.
Outside of the company. And most companies have a not most, I say sometimes they have a feedback box where you can post anonymous letters in there what you might want.
Seen that. And that's another way as well. Yeah. No, it's very fair. And that just needs to be actually looked at regularly and fed back to the right people. Steve, there's one other question that's come in here. Shan asks, what's your advice for those who are nervous to stand in front of a large audience to do an engaging presentation?
Right.
I thought that would be apt for you, given your extensive speaking.
I have lots of tips on handling nerves, but I refer first of all to 5 stages of nerves. And I always say that every time there's a trigger. What sets it off? So that technically isn't the nerves, but that's the trigger that sets it off. So it kickstarts it. It might be that you're told, oh, Prash, tomorrow you're going to stand up and present to the team. Or it might be when you go to bed at night and you start worrying about it. Or it could be as you get up to present. Whatever it is, that's the trigger. The trigger sets off a thought. And that thought is probably that inner critic in your head. And we all have that inner critic.
We all have that, yeah.
So that inner critic is going to give all the negatives, all the things like that. The thought will set off an emotion. And that emotion may be anxiety, fear, panic, anything like that. The emotion affects our physiology. So it could be dry mouth, it could be sort of tightness of the throat, could be heart pounding, speaking. Well, that's not the physio, that's the next bit. The physiology affects the actions, what we do. And that could be freezing, speaking too fast, sort of high-pitched voice, all these things. For each of those stages, I always say, like, if the negative thought, ask yourself, what would be the positive thoughts? What could be the best it could be? And start thinking about that and writing them down. The thoughts set off emotions. So ask yourself, what emotions would I like?
Right.
How would it, if it was really great, what do I like? And then you think about the emotions will set off the physiology. How would I like to be standing? And they will affect the results. So in many ways, it's rather like an NLP technique when you say, right, let's imagine now, take yourself back to a place where you were really good at something.
Right.
An area of expertise you're good at. What is it? What do you feel? What's your feeling? What's your emotion? What's the physiology? What's the behavior? And beyond that, there's other tips like breathing, deep breathing, sipping water, and room temperature, not ice cold.
Yeah. As speakers, obviously, that's a big mistake a lot of people do when they come on and they think that they need, it's got to be room temperature water. The vocal folds.
Yeah,
Prefer
absolutely.
that. Deep breathing, obviously, we're no strangers to that. You and I certainly involve in our well-being workshops. We use this deep breathing. There's a style of breathing, yogic breathing, which takes in rapid breaths through the nose and out through a shh, like a shh sound, and it really shoots out that stress, shoots it out. So shh, 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 shh. And just exercise. 10 or 15 or 20 of those can really just activate those neural pathways that are conducive to bringing that speaking presence up.
And I also like exercise. I mean, it may just be before going on stage, taking a walk around, going to the gents or the ladies, just stretching. And one of the things I think is the biggest one to remember is what I call the times 10 rule.
Oh, the times 10 rule.
10 rule is that inner critic in your head. It's 10 times bigger in your head than it appears to an audience. So people stop themselves, panic, because the audience will see all that. The audience will see a little bit of it, that's all. And I don't know yet of an audience that really want you to be boring and fail. Even if it's a sales competitor, they don't want you to be boring. You know, they want you to fail, but if compared to them, but they don't want you to be boring. So they're supporting you.
I really like that one, because I think I think we all have that. I think certainly as a I enjoy music and performing, and I often do think, well, did the audience know that I didn't manage to get that high note? Did they notice that I was in chest voice instead of head voice over here, or I was in head voice instead of chest, or I didn't get my vocal register right when I did the crossover? And it's what you say, I'm probably 10 times more worried. It's a tenth of what we think that they're even gauging. As long as
we think, I didn't say that, and then you stop because I forgot to add that.
And they're like,
what you meant to say. So no one knows, but these are the things. Just accept that it doesn't matter. And the other thing is just stage time, stage time, stage time. You will get better.
Stage time, or virtual stage time, of course, in this climate, Steve. Which leads me just to, in wrapping up, to tell us, what are you up to, Steve? What's on your hot plate or your radar during these unusual times at the moment?
Well, in the past, I was looking to focus more on larger companies to look at developing their people. Right now, I think it's more important to look at the smaller business on how the things they can do to make an impact, retaining their customers through their network, but also to improve the performance of teams by helping them to know how to make an impact online. Because making an impact, high impact communication is about what's your message, how much the impression do you make, is it the impression you want, is the right impact. If you're looking now online, so many people are very naive and using technology where they were particularly weak before, face to face, like people nervous talking to a crowd. They're often more nervous talking to screen. So it's now what technique we use to look at the screen, but it's not just overcoming nerves. For instance, I always say, because you're a confident speaker doesn't make you a good speaker. It's about developing techniques. And many companies right now, a lot of their people are working remotely, they're working online, but they're only working at probably, and I've seen a report this week that most companies are only about 20% efficient. So there's a lot to do on that, because if they don't improve the online communications, I don't see them improving the retention rate of their customers.
I couldn't disagree with that at all. I think therefore communication is such an important part. And on that, obviously, folks, if you've enjoyed and gotten value from this, then Steve, of course, I know that you offer extensive communication training, including online communication training for individuals as well as organizations. I know at the moment your focus is on those SMEs, smaller organizations that really actually don't have perhaps big support structures in place at the moment, with the bigger organizations out there who are really falling behind with that poor engagement, with that sort of poor productivity. And I think that's why this is a great time for people to be able to reach out to somebody like yourself, experts like yourself, who are able to help them to bridge the gap between where their workforce are falling short and where they need to get to. And not just the workforce, but obviously the leaders as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
So folks, if I will leave Steve's details here below. And on that note, I'd like to leave yourselves also with something that's, again, equally timely, whereby we too, at the moment at Stress to Success, are working with organizations, especially SMEs at the moment, with the area of supporting their workforces. We have an online coaching package, which is specially for workforces to help them in these areas of getting better connected with their teams, being more productive. The productivity thing is a real big hit. Steve, you really hit the nail on the head there. So our online coaching support service is a 6-week program with specific modules, especially to help with the well-being, resilience, and mental health of staff at home workforces, and helping them to improve their productivity, their resilience, and protect their mental health. We also have a parallel offering for leaders, and it really, again, it alludes to what you so rightly said, Steve, the need to be able to have leaders be wearing their own oxygen masks first before helping others. And therefore we have a crisis support mastermind for the leaders of organizations to help them to get their employees to be as best engaged as possible. And as you, I think, rightly said, let me use a different phrase to what you said there. It's, you talk about ambassadors, and I guess in our program, we talk about really harnessing that untapped talent pool and bringing out those people who are in that organization who could be a good talent, and helping them to step up during this time. And as you said, giving them leadership skills and delegating a lot of stuff. So if that's of interest, folks, do reach out to myself privately, and I'll have one of the teams circle back and would love to talk to you. And obviously, Steve and I are both here for you if you'd like to reach out with any queries or questions, or any kind of conversations you'd like to have in which way we can help you in our respective skill sets to support you in your organizations. So on that note, Steve.
Right, one request. One thing that could help me, so I like to collate stories of ambassadors and saboteurs. So if you have any horror stories or any really good stories,
excellent,
good for me, because I use them in my talks, if you're happy for me to do that. So if you're willing to, please contact me with those at steve@stevecatchick.com, and you'll be putting the details on anyway.
And they'll be anonymized anyway, so that will be great. Excellent. Thank you, Steve. Thank you for taking time out for being with us. I know you were on a good few hours of calls this morning, and obviously you're still staying busy with your online speaking engagements so much around the nation and beyond. So it's always nice to have you stop by. So thanks for being on the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.
No, it's a real pleasure, Steve. I think we should have you back at some stage, and we should do something on that communication piece, really effective communication. I think that would be really good. So if you're good with that, we'll try and have you back soon. We'll look at having audiences benefited greatly by that. Folks, you've stayed with us till the end, or if you're watching on this replay, thank you so much. Apologies for any of the technical audio glitches. This is the new normal at the moment. Most of us are having to bear with the technology and the glitches and the gremlins. So thanks for being with us till the end. Have a great weekend. Whatever you're doing, stay safe. Don't worry, we are all in this together, and we will continue to support one another with value-adding content to educate, enlighten, and sometimes entertain you during the weeks and months ahead. That's it from me, Prash from Stress to Success and Mantra Consulting. Steve Catchick, our special guest. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.